All right, I'm dropping the link into the chat right now. And then I shall go put it into the schedule, which is sitting here anyway. All right, hey everyone, let's do this thing. I'm feeling, I'm really tired. I'm really tired. Uh, my, um, my goal, hold on a second. Um, my whole goal for the week, honestly, I mean, not knowing exactly how recovery was going to go, um, but looking at it coming into the week, my goal was simply to do all 6 lectures. That was kind of the bottom line. Really, my true bottom line was get to all 6 classes in the week, which by virtue of being here right now, 2 minutes into the gig, I have succeeded at. So, but I'm definitely pretty beat, pretty tired. I did figure out I have secret cold pads, and if I place them in strategic spots that tend to hurt when I'm sitting in a chair like this, it'll actually stretch my longevity quite a bit. So I am doing that right now. I'm applying these cold pads. Um, they are fantastic units, by the way. That should buy me a little bit more hang time, but I'm definitely tired. So I want to kind of just, here's where we are in this class so far. Again, apologies for all the disruption. You already know that. I'm going to drop one more cold pad strategically down here. Yeah, that's going to help me. Um, what we've done so far, I want to just do kind of a review. I want to pivot and I want to have a discussion about what's the best, where we go from here as far as the semester is concerned. We talked quite a bit about the orders of ignorance early on and writing. That was a very big focus early on. I think those are both really critical because the orders of ignorance is very much about self-awareness and reasoning, the ability to rationalize, to communicate rationally, instead of simply getting locked into a certain perspective and then losing the ability to have intelligent discussion about things. And then writing is really reinforcing the ability to express yourself about those things. And you all need to be better writers anyway. So we did quite a bit early on about writing in that. Then I go out and I get myself whacked, right? 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago yesterday. Then we get into this section on history and a bunch of reading and some videos for you to watch, which was cringely. And social dilemma, I still don't have. I'll get it. I still don't have that cooked yet. And it kind of brings us to today where I don't really have a concrete topic. And the other thing that this does is it brings us to about the midpoint where the cuckoo's egg and Cliff Stall shows up, and that's the very first book inspired post. I've got to ungray the things that are coming up next week, like the book inspired post #1. Okay. What I want to do is show you real quick what I sort of have tentatively planned for down the stretch. And then again, have your thinking caps on. And be ready to jump in and contribute, okay? I've got 2 days of discussion about social media. That has become a massive, massive topic. We got 2 days, one of which is Stahl, second one of which is Dr. Nielsen, if I can get him. I know he's super busy these days on cybersecurity and espionage. Speaking of which, last night I may have finished, but last couple nights I watched Snowden, the movie Snowden. This is the Oliver Stone movie. Interestingly, there's a higher rated movie called Citizen 4, which is more of a straight up documentary and less of a dramatization. That is better rated than the movie dramatization with what's his bucket. I can never totally come up with his name, but I like him as an actor. Gordon Levitt something. Gordon, is it Gordon Levitt? Two last names. I don't remember. Somebody can look that up. Uh, but so that gets us kind of anyway. It was very, very interesting. I'd love to have a conversation about Snowden. Is dude a hero or is dude a traitor? You know, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. That sounds right. That sounds right, Beluga. Anyway, then I want to talk about at least one day talking about open source software. It is a sociological phenomenon, and every one of these topics, the challenges, can deserve way more time than we can possibly give to it. Um, but there's open source. Then comes 2 days that I wanted to talk about freedom of speech, which I think has become, it's very ironic, I guess, that in a world where there's a lot of platforms from which to speak, unprecedented, really, the ability to have a reach um, for your speech, that we, in my opinion, have shifted to an era where there is a threat on that, on freedom of speech, where, and we'll talk about the Overton window, this idea of what's acceptable speech in the public square. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Um, 2 days on intellectual property, which is an area that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I do a lot of work in that space with patent stuff. Last year, I had a couple of guest speakers from Oregon State University. Note, this is my Oregon State sweatshirt where I did my PhD. Anyway, Rosalinda and Abrar were great, and they have a um, a project thing that deals with sort of software and gender issues. Anyway, gender inclusive software, and anyway, they have this whole project. I thought they gave a presentation, and I can probably get them back. I thought it went really, really well. I have as an alternative, I have a really very good friend, former student, who, less of a, well, that other one was called, man, I think it used to be called the Gender HCI Project. What is it called now? Anyway, it's really interesting stuff. They've done some really great research, some great empirical foundation, laying some really cool empirical foundations. I also have a really good friend. So this is uh, she brings some really interesting perspectives, crazy smart. She was an undergrad at BYU. She actually did her PhD at BYU. Um, she is confined to a wheelchair, um, paraplegic. I don't know the whole history about all of that, if that was from birth or if that was something that happened after. But you have somebody who was a Hindu student at BYU, right? Sort of an LDS school. And then she goes off and she works at NASA. I think she's currently working at Amazon. But the notion of, so many, from a diversity perspective, Her name is Neha, and anyway, from a diversity perspective, she brings a really fascinating background, and so she could be really interesting to try to bring on board. I know she would if we could make schedules work out. But I could do like an either or between those two that deal more with sort of, you know, diversity kinds of issues. We definitely, I believe we have an underrepresentation of women in the field of computer science. Um, and there's more to talk about there. Then we've got a couple of writing workshops. There's writing workshops and reading circles. So we've got a couple more projects coming up that are in class where we're going to talk about writing. And the reading circles relate to the books, the second book that you have to be tagging pretty quick here. We talk about employment, just issues involved in going off into the workforce, contracts, things like that. We spend a day on personal and professional ethics. And then we kind of wrap up with the literary extravaganza. So, and there's a couple of days of flex still built in, and I'm of course trying to manage my own health and you know, and fatigue, which right now feels kind of high. Part of the complication, I started a medication yesterday that knocked me out for like 12 hours last night, and that anyway, it's made me a bit tired, I think, more than I probably would otherwise be. Anyway, so what I wanted to do was hit on any other topics that you feel we ought to hit. Again, you can go voice, you can drop these in the chat, but are there any, topics that you think would be, really valuable for us to jump on before we're out of here? Speak now, por favor. Everybody, turn off the office. Unmute, unmute this thing. What do you think? Are there topics that you kind of wish we would hit in a class like this?
A thought I had is maybe how maybe this one might be a little bit too far off and go into a different area, but maybe how it affects kind of social dynamics,
What do
computers.
you mean?
The first thought that came to my head was like families, like have computers ultimately been better for families overall, or they made it harder to have families?
Oh, interesting.
Does it not matter? I don't know. It's just a thought that came to my head that I was
Okay,
curious.
interesting. What else? What else do you think?
I honestly feel pretty happy with what we're already doing. Having read The Cuckoo's Egg and kind of learning about cybersecurity, and I'm going to read 1984 here soon and just kind of learning about the ethics. And I think privacy is one thing that really fascinates me with computer ethics and censorship.
Right. Yeah, I like that, Ian. Um, enjoy 1984. I just finished my reread of it last month. Um, it's remarkably poignant as a thing now than it ever has been, I think. Um, and I read that book in 1984, and then 37 years go by, and it's sort of suddenly more relevant than it was. And then especially that actually relates again to Snowden, right? The movie that I saw in the last couple days. What else? What do you think? And it's okay to be like okay with it. That's you don't have to disagree, or you don't have to have some other idea or thought. But a lot of the great ideas come out of the students, so I don't want to, I don't presume to have some kind of a lock on any of this sort of stuff. And given the time lost, because of my surgery, um, the schedule's a little disrupted, so we're just kind of playing it by ear. Anybody else? Any other ideas? Are you just feeding off my own low energy?
I mean, if no one else has one, I have another.
What's that?
Ethics of computer marketing. Just, I don't know. Something that I've always thought about is just how much marketing and ads and such are on the internet and such. How like YouTube having 2 ads, playing with no way to skip them, a lot of stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
Um,
I like that.
yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's whole sections we could talk about. We could talk about gaming. You could talk about gaming addiction as well. Uh, there's a lot. There's a lot to talk about. That's part of the yeah, lot we can hit. And it's really
I
the
have an
problem
idea.
is that I'm still struggling. You know, this is only the second time I've taught this class, and then with all the disruption in my own, you know, body, um, still trying to get my head around what I think this class really wants to have to be optimally effective, right? Oh, cryptocurrency. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think it'd be interesting to talk about maybe the impact that Elon Musk's satellite internet idea might have on society.
Agree. All right. Let me see.
Can y'all hear me?
Yep. Yep. Definitely.
Okay, did you just hear my idea about Elon Musk's?
Yep. I
Okay, just
responded. I
wasn't sure.
responded. I think I responded.
Yeah, I think my headphones are just being a little bit weird.
Okay. Yeah, no sweat. Um, yeah, you know, the other thing that happens is we burned a little bit of time on it. It was just kind of current events, you know. There's stuff that seems to be popping every single stinking day. Um, okay. If you come up with any other ideas as we're going, you know, please just throw them out. And, you know, I'm trying to build um, a little bit of a list, see what makes sense to weave in. The struggle with a class like this is that there's no real like canonical set of the correct, you know, here are the correct topics to make a class like this. You know, that doesn't exist. So that's one of the struggles, honestly. It's just kind of a refinement of what sort of tends to make the greatest sense. Um, okay, let me look back. Let me look back at the history of computing. Last thing I really want to touch about this. I don't remember if we talked about this on Tuesday, but I wanted to hit any other thoughts about Cringely. About I don't think we hit this too deeply, did we, on Tuesday? Tuesday's a blur. I don't remember much about Tuesday. Any thoughts about the Cringely videos? Could be comments, observations, criticisms, praise, you know, interesting ideas, questions, since I lived through all of that. Some of it hit when I was quite a bit younger. Sorry, getting a little warmer here. You know, some of it was the revolution was happening when I was a little younger, but I lived through, like literally lived through all of that. Yeah, Cringely being Triumph of the Nerds, Ammon. anyone, again, anything, I haven't actually gone through them to muster up my specific questions and comments. I did do that actually last semester and don't have those notes handy, just not on my game. But I've seen it a number of times and have pretty good recollection of the chunks. Just curious what you thought. What was like a conceptual hook for you, basically. Come on, you guys. Help a
All
brother out
right.
here.
I'm trying to think how to articulate this, but I don't know. I think it's amazing. The advent of the personal computer has really done a lot for, everyone. But I don't know, for some reason, watching Bill Gates, there was never a moment where I thought, man, I'd like to be in his shoes, or I'd like to be him. For some reason, I don't know. Some of the people who did make these big contributions, I wouldn't want to have their lives, I guess, is what I'm saying. I can't really put exactly why, but that's kind of overall feeling I got.
I think that's really interesting. And I resonate with that. I really tend to agree with that, you know? Typically, in my experience, the people who are, I don't know, I think you could extend it. You could extend it today, right, to the Zuckerbergs and Dorseys and uh, who else? Elon Musk. And, um, I kind of feel the same way about all of those folks, honestly. Uh, I think that a lot of the a lot of those folks are just wired really tight, you know. And yeah, Gabe, I also would like their money, but not their lives. They're wired pretty tight, and they do this thing in business and creation and design in part because they have to. It's almost like an OCD kind of thing. They almost can't help themselves, uh, and they just have to do that. And there's a bunch of what are the reasons why, right? Another thing that I think a lot of these guys demonstrate is a psychological condition referred to as hypomania. Okay, it's sort of technically on the same uh, cycle spectrum as uh, depression and kind of what do we call it? I wanted to say manic depression. That's what we used to call it. Bipolar. Yeah, more bipolar. It's a manifestation of that sort of group of symptoms. But in this case, in the case of hypomania, they are wired real tight. They sort of like don't sleep a lot because they can't sleep a lot, and they're just constantly in creative mode. They can't shut it off. It's constant. They're driven. They, work long hours just because they have to, something inside their heads. And and I think that from what I can tell, all of those, kind of psychotic creative billionaires are in that same category. They are just driven to do that. When people are like, "Oh, Elon Musk, he's so disciplined. He only sleeps 4 hours a night," and you're like, "Nope, nope, nope, nope. His body wakes him up. You know, he has to, and if it doesn't, his body, makes him set the alarm like that." So I just want to say that there is a bit of a psychotic personality type at play with these folks, a certain drive, you know, that comes from somewhere, obviously. Don't know how much of it is genetic, how much of it is sort of, nurture. societal, whatever comes in through the family, through some other experience. Not sure. Let me see. So yeah, Ammon said liked it a couple of weeks, but learning a little bit more about IBM and the foundation of Apple and Microsoft, right? And they are very different from what now. Robbie said, fascinated by the concept of riding the bear. Yeah, I like that a lot, that whole discussion. Ballmer talking about riding the bear, and it was, and you had to ride the bear because if you weren't riding the bear, you were under the bear, and so that notion of, riding the powerful player, which was really very much the relationship between Microsoft and IBM. And IBM was, there's a scene in Cringely where he talks about, you know, this force, this Arby, this company so feared, blah, blah, blah. And then he says, we're talking about IBM. And in the 90s, that was obvious what they were going to say. It was obvious that they were going to say IBM because Microsoft was still growing and there were other companies growing like Novell. And then there was a phase where you would have said Microsoft, and today, what's the company that everybody fears? Google? I don't know. I think honestly, right now, it's a little more distributed maybe than it has been. But there was a point when it was simply Microsoft. That was it. And before that, it was IBM. It's just fascinating to me that these things just sort of come and go. There's an ebb and there's a flow. Yeah, and this whole thing with an OS for IBM, which was OS2, and then his own OS, which was Windows, right? Now, what about this? There's a story. I have an article. It's actually in hard copy somewhere in a box, somewhere in this basement. But I actually have one. It was basically a story about the demise of WordPerfect, which was a company located in Northeast Orem, right here in Utah Valley. And WordPerfect was a big and growing, very successful billion-dollar company founded by a BYU CS professor, Alan Ashton, who I actually had a class from him in the late 80s. And he was already running WordPerfect at that point in time. What's interesting about that is there was a point where WordPerfect had the leading word processor in the industry. It was a money-producing machine. And with this leading the number one most successful word processor in the industry, and they got themselves into an interesting bit of trouble with technical debt. Okay, so true story, and I know a lot of the players that were involved in this, in what happens next. But WordPerfect had all of WordPerfect. They were huge, they were massive, and everything they did ran on DOS. Well, they ran on a lot of different platforms, but their sort of platform for the consumer, like the mom and pop, ran on DOS, and all of it was written in assembly language. Okay, the entire thing was written in assembly. You just have to believe me. And they kept kicking the can down the road about refactoring the entire thing into a language that would be sort of that could last longer, right? Where the problem is if you have a product, this happened to Debase with Debase 4. They rolled a new product of their database because they had to change it from assembly language to something high level, probably C. And when they did that, they had a release of their software. Hang on a second. They had a release of their software that added no new features and was worse than the previous one because all this release was doing was trying to just re-release in a high-level programming language, not assembly. True story. And that was actually the point when DBase died. They held 75%. Back to this issue of monopoly, DBase held 75% of the world database market. And on that release, where they took on their technical debt in one release, they lost the whole company. WordPerfect kind of did the same thing, but they needed some help from Microsoft. So WordPerfect's philosophy was to have products that would run on a variety of different platforms. So they were okay being multi-platform at WordPerfect, but Microsoft had basically grown up with two big divisions, right? Originally, Microsoft was programming languages. That became this sort of smaller market. Eventually, was taken over by operating systems and applications. And those applications eventually would include things like Excel, right? Word, PowerPoint, things like that. Well, there was a part where, so you have Microsoft Operating Systems Group, and they were the group that was doing OS2 with IBM, and they were also simultaneously developing Windows, okay, at the same time. And then you had this application group. And there was actually a case, I feel like it went to the Supreme Court, but there was a Justice Department thing that came, about monopolistic stuff, antitrust, and was recommending that Microsoft be split between, that the applications become a separate company and the operating systems become a separate company. My own feeling looking back is that actually would have been the proper play. Because the problem, like we talked a little bit about monopolistic behaviors, where if you own the coal mines and you own the steel mills and you own the railroads, you have too much leverage, right? So for example, Microsoft had the ability to ship all of its operating system software with Microsoft applications, giving the Microsoft applications an unfair market advantage, right? Because of success in another market, which was operating systems, that was unrelated directly to the applications business. Okay. Now, meanwhile, you're WordPerfect. I hope the story is interesting. Meanwhile, you are WordPerfect, and you are realizing that you have to refactor. You have to rewrite your entire product. And also, by the way, can I just say that OS2 was a really good operating system. It really, really was. It was my favorite operating system for about a decade. It was better than Windows when Windows was young. Like pre-Windows 3, OS2 was a much better operating system. Eventually, it was taken over entirely by IBM, and eventually sort of died to death. But okay, so you're WordPerfect, and you have to refactor your entire product. It's a big, big freaking product, and you're going to make it GUI, which they've not done prior to this point. Well, you understand that that Microsoft itself is working on two things, Windows and OS2. And you know this because they've released Windows like 1.0. And you know this because there's OS2. Essentially, and this is what, I'll find chapter and verse on this, but I've got an article. And again, I know some of the players at the highest levels at WordPerfect. But essentially, it came down to, as I understand the story, conversations between WordPerfect and Microsoft, in which WordPerfect is asking Microsoft, okay, you're working on two platforms, OS2 and Windows. We can't make two new apps. We're going to be struggling to make one new app. What are we going to do it on? What's the platform? By the way, they are in this boat in part because they waited too long, because they didn't understand technical debt. And that's another topic about how, frankly, poorly run WordPerfect was from the perspective of software engineering principles. Another long topic. But here's the bottom line. They flat out asked the this was the OS guys. They asked the OS folks straight up, we've got to make one version. What version should we do it for? And they told WordPerfect, flat out lied, straight up lied. And I've got a question coming up here that I'd love some input on. A little philosophical, ethical question. But they straight up lied and said, Windows, it's just a little toy. It's a thing we're playing with to, push ideas, whatever. The company's dedicated to OS2. The future is OS2. It's all OS2. Okay. Meanwhile, internal to Microsoft, they are reworking Word from a DOS-based into a GUI-based, right? And guess what platform? Guess what the only platform is that at that time that Microsoft is developing for when it comes to Word, which would be a competing product to WordPerfect, right? Any guesses? What's your guess? Yeah, Emin, any insights you've got about your dad as WordPerfect as a developer would be really interesting. Alex said he remembered when his dad used to work at Novell and Microsoft kept baking things into their platform that would compete with Novell's products and he got really frustrated with it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Alex, yeah, the answer is Windows. They were building Word only for Windows, but at the same time um, telling WordPerfect straight up and really straight up lying because they knew. But that was an example of where they had a dominant position, a nearly monopolistic position. And you had, there was a long thing. This comes out in our discussion about open source. There was a long struggle where the open source folks were like, every PC just about in the world would come preloaded with Windows. And you could still pick and say, well, I want Linux as my OS, but they would still charge you a royalty for Windows, because it had to do with royalty licensing. And this is just an example of Microsoft using a very, very dominant position in operating systems to leverage a lot of sort of behaviors, which they couldn't have done without that monopolistic position. So they told WordPerfect, the future is OS2, go in all the way. So WordPerfect, billion-dollar company that's about to cease to exist, throws all of their effort into rebuilding and redesigning this massive product to run on OS2 and no Windows product. And sometime after they're down the road a little ways, Microsoft and IBM announced their split and how IBM is going to take OS2 and how Microsoft is going to take Windows. And that's the point at which WordPerfect realizes that it's really screwed. It's just really kind of screwed. Eventually, what happens is I don't even know what you're going to describe it, in some sort of Ray Norda fever dream, Novell decides, I don't know what happened. I think Ray Norda this is when I was working at Novell. I kind of feel like he became obsessed with just like, instead of trying to figure out what we were, I think he was obsessed with trying to compete with Microsoft straight up at what Microsoft was. So they acquired Quattro Pro, which was a spreadsheet, from Borland International. And then we acquired WordPerfect for $1 billion. We acquired WordPerfect. And now we had a spreadsheet, a word processor, Oh, and then we acquired Linux from who owned the whole thing at that point? Probably Santa Cruz Operation, aka SCO. If some of you remember the controversy 20 years ago, 10, 20 years ago with a company called SCO, it held the rights to, I don't even remember, I want to say AT&T Unix, but basically they became like the owners of Unix. I think they may have also done a deal to acquire Digital Research's DOS. So suddenly Novell had operating systems. They were trying to like compete in the same space by buying their way in, but they didn't have the structure to support it internally. It was just like I said, it feels to me like it was a fever dream. Here's a true story, and then I want to come back to some of the questions and comments that you're posting. But I was working at Novell at the time, and I was just a Joe engineer, and I had about $500,000 in stock options, and stock was doubling every 6 months at Novell. That's how fast we were growing. Stock was doubling every 6 months. So I was going to be a millionaire in 6 months and set for life in about another 2 years, the pace we were going. But this happened, and then one of my buddies actually like stuck his head in my office. It was about 4 o'clock or something on I don't remember, some day of the week. And he pops his head in and he goes, "We're buying WordPerfect." And I said, "No, we're not." And he's like, "That's the word on the street. We're buying WordPerfect." And I was like, and I swear I literally said this to him. And I said, "There is nobody in this company that's stupid," was what I said to him. He goes, "That's the word on the street." I'm like, "All right." So the markets close in New York, and then an announcement goes out that we've bought WordPerfect. And it's like everybody knew. This is why I'm calling it Ray's fever dream. Everybody knew that it was a bad idea, but somehow Ray got it into his mind and was obsessed about it. The markets just pounded us, and the stock dropped insanity. And I woke up the next morning broke. I lost $500,000 overnight. And it's part of why I can tell that story, that it didn't end well. It just literally just everything tanked, and I had nothing. It did make it easier for me to quit and go get my PhD, which I did. But no, it was a fascinating point. Now here's the other thing we did that was also incredible. We bought WordPerfect for $100 million. These are ballparks. You can sanity check my numbers elsewhere. My recollection is that we bought WordPerfect for about $1 billion, and that we sold them then about a year later for $100 million to Corel. And then the other thing Corel did, which was, I think, really dumb in hindsight, even at the time I thought it was dumb because I had a lot of friends that worked at WordPerfect. They basically said, we want all the bodies need to move to Canada, where Corel was based. Where are they? Toronto? I don't remember. But it was like everybody in Utah Valley that's working at WordPerfect, if you want to keep your job, you got to move to Canada. And you're going to just import a couple thousand people, you know what I mean? And this is Utah County, right, where people are like, their families are here, you know what I mean? Lot of you know what I mean? A lot of values in those developers that didn't mean we move across the world to keep our job, that we stay and take a pay cut in order to be here in Utah, you know. But they kind of misread all of that, as opposed to saying, let's leave you separate. They played that card, which I thought was too fast and too furious a card to play at the time. So they then lost the majority of the people that actually knew what the product did, which meant they lost the mental model, and all they had was the code. And then they proceeded to, struggle to make a real product. And it's still around, I guess, but it's, Anyway, it's just a fascinating set of dynamics, but all of that gets triggered, and then Novell never recovers. Novell never recovers from that, in my opinion, from that whole debacle. And all of it actually happens, in a sense, when WordPerfect asks Microsoft's OS people a straight up question, which that would make sense, right? This app company is talking to this operating systems company. That actually makes sense, unless you then go, oh, but the operating systems company is not only in a dominant position, but also is selling apps that compete with the apps of the company that is talking to it. And you straight up lie. Can you do that? Is there a way to say, well, that's business. I might say whatever I feel like saying in business. That's just strategy, right? That's, is it wrong to lie in that setting? If you're a basketball player, is it wrong to head fake an opposing player and, create an ankle breaker for that player? You're like, they bite on the head fake and then they go that way and you go that way. Didn't you just lie to them? Didn't you try to persuade them that you were going left when you actually were going to go right? Isn't that true? Don't you, in football, don't you line up and try to disguise your formation so that you can come out of that formation, looking like a run play, but actually have a pass? I mean, is that a lie? It's deceptive. It's certainly deceptive. Yeah. What do you think about that? What are the ethics of that whole thing? Let's say, and I'm going to double back and look at some of the comments. What say you? I'm just reading the comments. Okay, so Ammon, you're saying that your dad actually worked on the first OS2 version at WordPerfect, and then later on the Windows version, that he was bitter towards Windows because of them saying. So that's corroborating my story. Yeah, Austin, if everyone's doing it, is it cheating? Aaron said, if you play a game professionally, you agree to abide by its rules. If something isn't against the rules, it's fair game. I say that's a different space than business. Yeah, I agree. What do you think? What are your thoughts? Robbie said, I think it may have to do, no, Robbie said, I think the stakes are very different when comparing businesses to sporting events. A lot more lives are in the balance. I think it's pretty dirty. Agreed. Ammon says, I think it may have to do with expectation situation. In a game, you may expect sneaky or cheeky play from an opposing team, but in a business interaction, there's a level of professionalism, so maybe it's expected you don't lie like that. Wasn't it in the Cringely videos where the one guy says that the Microsoft guy just looked at me and he said, "You made a mistake. You trusted us." It was Metcalf. It was Bob Metcalf. It's the next set of Cringely videos. That's right. There's another set of Cringely videos. It's a Return of the Nerds, Triumph of the Nerds Part 2 or something. I think that's the one that Bob Metcalf shows up in, who's the inventor of Ethernet, where he says that this guy at Microsoft just flat out says to him, "You made a mistake. You trusted us." One of the things that I've always felt when it comes to like contracts, I don't think you should ever get into business or sign a contract with somebody that you wouldn't do that deal with on a handshake. The role of the contract then is just to codify the agreement. You know what I mean? Articulate what you said so you don't have decision rot later on, or somebody's like, whoa, 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 you said, and you're like, no, that's not what I meant, not what I said. You know, the contract codifies the things you talked about. But one of the things I've learned working in intellectual property is that by the time you're having to litigate the contract, it's a mess. Excuse me. And just because you have a contract doesn't mean like, no, we have a contract. Go to court, judge will go boom. Yeah, you know, many years and much money later, you don't, in my view, again, take this to the bank, in my opinion, don't do business with somebody that don't sign a contract with somebody that you wouldn't feel comfortable making that entire business arrangement on a handshake. Then the contract just helps to clarify for later. Okay. Same thing like having a patent. Well, I'll just, you know, they're going to violate my patent and I'm going to go and then that'll stop them. No, it's just it's something you've got to build from, but you still have to go, you know, that process. There's no guarantees of how it pops out. It's expensive. Let me see. Alex said it's different when you're a player and the referee. Yeah, Microsoft was an app developer and the ones making the platform the app would run on. In other words, the operating systems people were saying something to WordPerfect that directly benefited the Word app developers at Microsoft by taking competition out. That's kind of the definition of monopolistic behavior. It's a restraint of trade. It's a unfair competition. It's where you leverage some position to create an unfair and imbalanced environment. John said WordPerfect probably shouldn't have taken Microsoft at its word. Yeah, no pun, right? Especially if they were competing, you have to anticipate risks like that. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Gabe said, I think it would have been wise for them to have gotten it in writing just to cover your backside. Agreed. John says, you can't take a company at its word. They're in business for self-preservation and self-interest. I think that's true. But here's the thing, and this is really important. I don't feel like I have ever, in business, I don't mean picking a grocery store and going to I've done business with grocery stores, right? Walmart and Smith's and Harmon's and whatever. And when I go into a Harmon's here local next to me, you know, and I'm buying some food, I do feel like I'm interacting with the company. Same thing with Walmart, or I'm buying something on Amazon. But when I'm making deals with potential partners, like we're going to sign a contract and we're going to do a joint venture, we're going to license you our software and we're going to do certain things together. I've never made a deal with a company. I've really made a deal with an individual, if that makes sense. And I think that in my experience, again, you know, if you disagree or whatever, that's totally fine. But in my experience, it never felt to me like I was making a deal with another company. It usually would be a person that I've had interactions with, a reason to trust them, a reason to believe them, somebody that I would do a deal on, you know, with a handshake. In other words, what John said about, you know, companies are in business for self-preservation and self-interest, I think that's probably, I'm going to say that it's slightly overstated because I'm going to make my controversial political statement of the day. 8 years ago, when was it? 8 years ago. Yeah, 8 years ago. In the second Obama election, Mitt Romney famously said in an exchange with somebody at some town hall meeting, I think in Iowa, he said, companies are people. He was basically saying somebody was making a statement about, no, we don't take the money from people, we take the money from companies, which frankly, from a pure business perspective, is in my mind, a boneheadedly naive perspective. And Romney, who understands business, called it out, and he said, in my view, correctly, he said, companies are people, my friend. And the press lost their crap because apparently they also don't understand business. The reality is that companies are people. And the folks, it is the folks running it, it is the shareholders, the investors. The notion of companies are this monolithic, shark-like structure that's purely self-preserving and devours anything in its path. It's a sort of a description. When you read 1984, it's the way that capitalists are described by Big Brother and the sort of the collectivist government. They describe capitalism, and I've seen like almost verbatim, with no sense of irony, by the way, and no quotes around it, but nearly verbatim portrayals of corporations as being somehow this non-human entity that has its own motivations, and they're always evil, and it's always about greed, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In my experience, that's simply not true. I'm not saying, and because of the word always, there are companies that are intensely greedy and self-serving and cutthroat, but it is because the individuals who are people who are running those companies are greedy and cutthroat and unethical, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. I've known plenty of companies, including, larger size companies, that the individuals in question were just simply great people, and you make friends and you stay friends for a long time, and that just never would they were just always upright and ethical, and you knew that because of who the leaders were, the managers who created it. What was the ethic that distills out? Microsoft, with Bill Gates at the top, eventually acquired Bill Gates' sort of DNA, which is pretty cutthroat and unethical at times. And Apple did the same thing with Steve Jobs, with his ethics, which were very unethical sometimes. So I'm just saying, when Romney got ripped for saying companies are people, in my opinion, he was dead on. I think he said an absolutely true thing. I've never made a deal, and I've made a lot of business deals over the decades. I've never made a deal with a company. I've only made deals with individuals who happen to represent that company. And I've been in situations where somebody tells me, hey, so-and-so just left, company C. And I'd be like, ooh, okay, that's no good. And it would literally impact the way we were now going to deal with that company. Or, hey, company so-and-so just acquired so-and-so. And you're like, all right, well, we can work with them now. There wasn't just this faceless, soulless entity. It's people. It's people. Just like Soylent Green is people. Sorry, spoiler. Let me see. Looking back at the comments. Gray, if you've ever watched the show Silicon Valley, I have not, but I've wanted to. That they highlight a lot of the unethical yet legal behavior that occurs in the tech industry, a lot of which we've already talked about here. The old political phrase, trust but verify, that was, I think that was actually Reagan who said that first. Hang on. Oh, yeah, sliding my cold pack down. Gabe said, legal versus ethical is always an interesting subject to get into. How unethical does something need to be before you legislate it? Where's that line? Absolutely. That's why I think that I think my own belief is that you have to have a line of ethics that is above the line of legality. I think that if the only line of ethics that you have is the line of legality. I think probably your line is too low. That's my own opinion. Your mileage may vary. Okay, John said, I saw someone's post asking people to support small businesses, and they said something along the lines of support small businesses. That way your money will go to real people and not a wealthy CEO. But I couldn't help but think about myself and all the people I know that work for large companies. Obviously, there's a difference, but I think it's a mistake to paint larger companies as evil when millions of people earn their living working for larger companies. And obviously, I'm all for supporting small business, but I think that relates to what you said about Romney's statement. Yeah, I agree with that, John. I agree. And the problem, I think, is that my fundamental problem is with the absolutist statement. That's my biggest problem. The absolutism of the whole thing. You know what I mean? That's really where I have the problem. You know, all corporations are evil. That's bullcrap. That's an indefensible. It's an absolutely indefensible statement. It's overreaching by talking about all of something, you know, and this kind of categorization. Also, it's not nuanced, right? Remember, my political position is radical nuance and radical civility. Those are my fundamental political positions: radical civility and radical nuance in political conversation. Tease it apart. What are you talking about? What exactly are you talking about? You know, I think that's really, really important. Um, all right. I think we got a couple more comments rolling. Let's see. Acting in self-interest or for self-preservation arguably isn't evil. It's natural. I agree with that, John. I agree. I agree. Well, then you get into things like lying, you know, deliberately lying and or misrepresenting. You know, I had a situation where it was at Novell, but there was some project, and I don't remember the details. It's been a long time, 25 years, maybe 30 years. But there was another manager, and she was in a position. Things like this happened to me as well. We used to corroborate about this sort of thing. But she was in a situation, I'll just blend it together, her experience and my experience, where in her case, I remember her talking to me at the time. We were QA managers, and they were going to, the product was going to slip, and they needed to kind of like blame it on something for the media, for a press release. Why is the product not out? And they wanted to say that we found problems in QA, or that there were delays in QA. And I remember she said to me, we were talking, and she's like, you know how this is going to go down. Here's how it's going to go down. First, it's not true. It's delayed in QA because the product sucks and has bugs, which come from the developers who wrote a lousy product. That's what actually happened. So she basically said in a meeting, and took a lot of heat for this, she said, I'm not going to agree. You do whatever you want to do, but I'm personally not going to agree to sign up for a lie. I know what happened, and that's not a true story. If you want to feed that to the press and somebody wants to come talk to me about it, uh, you know, I will tell them that that's a lie. So I'd probably recommend you not do it. But she told me, she's like, what's going to happen is it's going to start off as a reasonable scapegoat, and then everybody is going to start believing it internally, and eventually I'm going to catch crap for it as if it were real. That's exactly how it played out. There came a point like 3 weeks later where somebody came into her office and was just like, yo, it's really upsetting that you would hurt this product by, not being prepared on the QA side. And literally somebody inside the company had read the press clipping with the lie to assuage and pacify the market about a certain thing, you know, and then was actually calling her on the carpet inside the company for it. Like the lie had become the truth internally. It's just that kind of crazy crap. But once you start to go down that line of making crap up, I just think, I don't know. I just think it's not a good play. Okay, let me hit a few more things, then we can wrap up. Gabe said, I think it's why it's important to look at different big businesses and their actions, how they treat their employees, how they treat the environment. I agree with that. Gabe said, for example, I used to work for Sam's Club / Walmart, and they treated all the employees like garbage. Fair enough. They fired me baselessly and refused to give me the bonus I earned, so now I don't shop there. Totally agree. Now, obviously, I don't know the dynamics since I wasn't there, right? But absolutely, that's your experience. Still a little bitter. Totally get it. So yeah, it's really that whole question. Anyway, those ethics flow. You understand that companies don't have ethics in and of themselves. Since companies are people and people have ethics, people at the top set the tone for the ethics that are going to percolate through the company. Eventually, it makes its way into the DNA of the company. And then that just becomes kind of how they do business. So anyway, that's a bit of a good discussion, I think, about some issues of history, some, little bit of true stories, things I was involved in, things that were, impactful in terms of the industry. But at the end of the day, in my view, there are actions of individuals, and those individuals are making agentive choices as an agent, meaning somebody capable of acting. They're making active choices about whether they're going to do moral things or immoral things, legal things or illegal things. And that really, to me, that's actually the bottom line. In good companies that I've seen and some that I've run, I've been in situations where cash flow's tight, and I've got a business partner, and this month everybody got paid except for us. So rather than be like, yeah, grade A bastard, rather than that being the scenario, it's more just like, well, we own the upside. If it's really big and successful, nobody benefits more than us. But right now, nobody's more at risk of losing it all either. But that means we got to take care of our people first. And so we'll pay them even if we're going to go broke, not get paid for 6 months. I've done that. Put other people first. And prioritize to myself last as a business owner. I think that's a good way to go. Honestly, I just think you take care of people and you engender a tremendous amount of loyalty. That's bottom line. And then those folks will do anything for you because they know that you'll do anything for them. That's humanity. That's just humanity at play. My opinion. Okay, you know what? It's 9 after 5. I'm pretty beat. Should we just call it? A couple of maybe bookmarks we can talk about later. Whoever made the comment about Klobuchar, Senator Klobuchar, trying to submit, legislature stuff for monopolistic behaviors. Some of the jobs behavior relative to the GUI, to the Xerox PARC thing is quite fascinating. But let's call it for now. I'm wrapping. Keep writing blog posts. I'm going to make the quick exit.